Well, this week marks a year since the start of the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region, a conflict that's reportedly killed thousands of civilians, plunged 400,000 into famine, and forced maybe 2.5 million people to flee their homes. Now, you might recall it started when the Nobel Peace Prize-winning Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops into Tigray. That's a region in the country's north. And he accused its governing party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or the TPLF, of mounting surprise attacks against military bases in the area. Well, since then, the TPLF has staged a dramatic comeback, as The Economist described it this week, and now looks poised to launch an assault on the capital, Addis Ababa. It really is a startling escalation, one that's led to a nationwide state of emergency being declared and fears of an all-out war. To discuss this, I was joined yesterday evening by Kjetl Tronvoll, who is a director of Oslo Analytica and Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies at Oslo New University College, and I welcomed him.
Hi, how are you doing?
What do you understand to be the situation in Ethiopia right now, please?
It certainly is dramatic. The war changed its dynamics in June this year when the TPLF regained control of its regional capital in Tigray and pushed further south out of their home region. Now, as we speak, the TPLF forces, together with the Oromo Liberation Army forces, are closing in on Addis Ababa and are about 300 kilometers to the north of the city.
Is it conceivable the capital could fall, in your view?
Certainly it is. The Ethiopian Federal Army has been decimated in the war and has lost several key battles and thousands, if not tens of thousands, of troops. And the command chain on the federal government side has been ruptured. And the Tigrayan Defense Forces are much more now coherent and well-disciplined and much stronger fighting force than the federal government. So yes, they may take the capital if they so wish.
What is the reason being given by the Tigrayan forces for this dramatic advance?
They have one key reason. They are trying to save their famine-struck population. Actually, right now, the latest number, there are 900,000 people in Tigray famine-struck, and 5.5 million are dependent upon food aid. But the federal government are blocking all humanitarian access to the region. So that's the key reason they are articulating, saying that we are putting pressure on the federal government until they will open up for unimpeded humanitarian access.
Well, this is a crisis at a range of levels then, obviously humanitarian and military and possibly beyond. What might be the political ramifications for Abiy Ahmed if the capital does fall?
Well, he's out of power. That's it. The TPLF has expressed that it is too late for a peace settlement prolonging Abiy Ahmed's time in power. It might be now that the US Special Envoy, Ambassador Feltman, just arrived in Addis Ababa more or less as we speak, and the negotiations he will push for might be more a transitional arrangement, that you have a clear exit of the current Prime Minister and a deadline for his tenure.
Well, yes, I read in one of the, I think the Crisis Group's report, that you could have a range of agreements, that the Tigrayan forces freeze their advance in the state of Amhara, another part of Ethiopia, in exchange for Addis Ababa's full cooperation in expediting humanitarian assistance to the north, and then each would revert to their original territories, if I can put it like that. So is that doable, do you think?
It's too late, I think. That could have been doable in June or in July even, but not now, because obviously the TPLF and the Tigrayan Defense Forces, they are in a position of strength. And the Ethiopian government are extremely weak. So they can no longer dictate the conditions for an agreement or for a transition. That's in the hands of the TDF and the OLA, as I see it.
It's extraordinary developments, isn't it? I mean, there was also a report released this week following a joint investigation by the UN and Ethiopia, which found that, quotes, all sides fighting in the war in the northern region of Tigray committed violations that may amount to war crimes. Do you judge there will be any ramifications after these findings?
It's no news in that report, and that report itself is very biased in its approach, and it is a seriously methodological flaws in this empirical data gathering. So it's a rather discredited report already, basically because they collaborated with the main perpetrators of the atrocities we have seen over the last year. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which is directly under the Ethiopian government. And the Human Rights Watch report, the Amnesty International report, the broad-based empirical research done by University of Ghent in Netherlands, they provide a much better detailed account of the human rights and war crimes committed in Tigray over the last year. So I don't think this report will have any significant beyond the fact that it is quite embarrassing for the UN to be part of such a study. But of course, since it is a UN stamp on it, it creates a certain attraction in international media itself.
I mean, we know that Eritrea has been embroiled in this war under that extremely doubtful president of theirs, Afwerki, almost from the beginning with its forces backing Prime Minister Abiy's. Have any other international players become involved in this conflict yet?
Not with the boots on the grounds, with the exception of Somalia, Mogadishu, Somalia I'm talking about. There are clear indications that Somalia early on sent about 3,000 troops who were in training in Eritrea to the Tigrayan war theater, meaning that Isaias Afwerki utilized them and sent them also to fight his war in Tigray, Ethiopia. Beyond that, we don't have any evidence for other foreign troops on the ground, but certainly there are regional interests and destabilizing strategies, you might say. Sudan is currently embroiled in a border conflict with Ethiopia in the Al-Fashqa Triangle. Egypt has its stakes in the problem as the Gerd Dam on the Blue Nile. And you have Middle Eastern actors across the Red Sea. And of course, all the big powers like China and US is watching very closely what's happening.
Well, that's what I was wondering, whether it is, we're going back to that sort of terrible Cold War element of things where you always had to look at which big power was supporting whom, but you don't sound as if that's quite there yet.
Not quite yet, but we see some of those tendencies playing out in the UN Security Council, that China and Russia are on the side of the Ethiopian government, to use that term, and are blocking any kind of resolution on the war, at least until now, while the US and the Western representatives in the Security Council have wanted to take a stronger stand. So it might convert into, as you say, a much more geopolitical play here, where certainly Abiy Ahmed and his government has made the US and the Western powers the enemy rhetorically for his cause, and are hence leaning on now Russia, China, Iran, Turkey to purchase arms, for instance.
Because he's absolutely desperate, isn't he, by the sound of you? See, I wonder what then happens to the people in this. I mean, there's some incredible pictures the New York Times had of young men being lined up, just conscripted to fight. And obviously this is really serious now. There are fears, according to the Times, that we could start to see ethnically motivated violence in Addis as the conflict escalates. Can I ask you this? Because I don't think many of us would know. Are there visible differences between the different ethnic groups in Ethiopia that might result in people being immediately recognisable as from one tribe or another, and therefore at heightened risk of danger?
First of all, I must arrest you. There is ethnic profiling, arrest and violence in Addis as we speak. It is not just a fear. There might, if you are very familiar with the Ethiopian cultural variety, you might spot some differences. But, many people in Ethiopia are of mixed descent, so to say. The intermarriage across ethnic groups are prevalent all across the country. So it is not that easy to spot a Tigrayan. But of course, the language is distinct, and
Right.
people speaking Tigrinya on the streets of Addis are picked up and thrown in detention without any reason whatsoever but their language.
But when the Tigrayans arrive, if they do, will they dish out something similar to the others?
Well, I won't vote for them, but I doubt it. They are a very disciplined fighting force, and the political elite, so to say, the political leadership, are also very ideological based and consensus driven. And so far, at least, in the history of warring of TPLF, which stretches back 45 years or more, we have not seen those kind of revenge repercussions against civilians or innocents. So I doubt that will happen.
Can you see any circuit breaker?
It is difficult at this time to see that. It all depends on Abiy Ahmed himself. But reading his latest statements of yesterday and the day before, where he calls for a total war mobilization of all civilians to the war front and all state resources to the war, he has come with expressions which was actually censored by Facebook yesterday, that we're going to dig ditches so deep to bury the enemy with blood. I don't see any signs yet of he caving in until probably the TDF and the OLA forces are knocking on the palace door, so to say. Then he might flee the country and we can have a transition.
Dear me, it's a pretty inauspicious sequel to the whole Nobel Peace Prize award, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is.
Oh, well, that's an incredible overview you've given us. Pretty depressing, actually. Let's hope that Mr. Feltman can do something useful. Kjetl Tronvoll, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And Mr. Tronvoll is Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies at Oslo New University College. And we did hear overnight that 9 anti-government factions in Ethiopia had formed an alliance in Washington to oppose Abiy Ahmed. It's not quite clear just what impact this will have, but it's possible, I suppose. It's a bit of a circuit breaker. And just remembering, because following up from our discussion last week about Facebook, it was actually last month that Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, told Congress she came forward in part to shine a light on, quotes, how badly Facebook was handling places like Ethiopia. And it was on Thursday that Facebook actually suspended the Ethiopian government's account. So, that brings it into stark focus, doesn't it?